Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala Nabi Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So as always, we begin by thanking the audience, the attendees for coming and making time on your Monday evening to be with us here in the masjid for the Monday meeting. And this is especially this particular evening is especially worthy of thanks and appreciation because today is the day of Arafah, and many people were likely fasting and may have opted not to come because they wanted to be home to have iftar with their families, etc. So for you to make the sacrifice and to come out and be with us, Jazakumullah khairan, I just want to say thank you on top of thank you. And last week, we continued our text study, which was centered around providing insight into how Shaitan practices his enmity against Adam and his progeny. In last week's segment, we pondered verses 118 and 119 of Surah An-Nisa, the fourth surah of the Quran, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, لعنه الله وقال لأتخذن من عبادك نصيبا مفروضا ولأضلنهم ولأمنينهم ولآمرنهم فليبتكن آذان الأنعام ولآمرنهم فليغيرن خلق الله ومن يتخذ الشيطان وليا من دون الله فقد خسر خسرانا مبينا. So in these two verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, Allah did certainly curse him, but he said, meaning Iblees, I will take from your servants a share ordained. I will mislead them, and I will fill them with false hopes, and I will order them to slit the ears of cattle, and I will command them so that they deface the fair-natured created by Allah. And whosoever, forsaking Allah, takes Satan for a friend has certainly suffered a manifest loss. So we pondered these two verses in general. We talked about their meaning, or the meaning of the alfaz, the words and the expressions. And then we spent a good amount of time talking about the meaning and providing examples of the terminology or the term or the expression where Allah says, فَلَيُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ, defacing or altering the fair nature created by Allah. And there were several questions that came in the course of the talk, and after the class was over, there were some questions that were raised during and after the class when people wanted to practically understand, what does this mean in a practical sense? And does this apply to it? Is this included in it? Etc. So before responding to some of the questions that time did not permit us to answer, so there were some questions that came after the class was over, or right when the class was about to end, and we were unable to answer those questions and provide insight into whether or not they were considered from the prohibited altering of the creation of Allah. So before we answer those questions, bi'idhnillah, I'd like to quickly recap, as we always do, the most important lessons from last week's session. So from that session, we learned, one, that from the weapons of warfare used by the shaitan against mankind is the following. One, misleading mankind in both knowledge, al-ilm, and action, al-amal. So the shaitan, one of the things that he is very keen to do is to misguide us in terms of what? Our knowledge. To feed us misinformation. To get us to fall into misunderstandings, misconceptions, and even deviant beliefs. Make us believe the wrong things. Because if he can get us to believe the wrong things, if he can mislead us in terms of what we believe, he can then follow suit and mislead us in terms of what we do, how we practice. he can get us to fall into one of his most favorite things that he likes man to fall into, which is al-bid'ah, innovations. And to do things in the name of Islam, in the name of worshiping Allah, which Allah did not authorize. Because the shaitan knows, as the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith of Aisha, "Man amila amalan laysa alayhi amruna fahuwa rad." Whoever does a religious deed, does a deed in the name of worshiping Allah, and that deed has not been legislated by Allah, then his deed will be rejected. He'll get no reward for it. No matter how sincere he claims to be, he'll get no reward for it if he does it and he doesn't do it in accordance with what Allah and his messenger have legislated. The shaitan knows this, so he's keen to misguide us, not just in terms of what we know, our knowledge, but in terms of our practice, in terms of our actions. He wants our actions to be gone astray. He wants that to be the case, so we won't get any rewards for the good deeds that we do. The second weapon of warfare that was mentioned in the ayah is filling mankind with false hopes and wishful thinking. So what the shaitan likes to do, in addition to making us go astray, is while we are astray, convincing us that we're on the right path. Making us believe, making us convinced that we're doing God's work. We're striving in Allah's way. He wants us to convince us that fact. Why? Because the person who is doing wrong, while they're convinced that they're doing good, are they going to repent? How many of us, today for example, we read Quran. How many of us read Quran, and then after we finished reading Quran, we said, Astaghfirullah. Oh Allah, I seek your forgiveness for reading Quran. Does anybody do that? Because we're certain it's what? It's a good deed. But if one of us were to, for example, tell a lie, la samahallah, or backbite someone, la samahallah, and we reflected on that, we would say, Astaghfirullah. I seek Allah's forgiveness because we realized we did something wrong. So what the shaitan likes to do is twofold. The first half of it is to misguide us and make us believe that the wrong things that we're doing are actually the right things. The second half of it is to convince us that we are going to get what the people who are guided will get. To convince us that even though we do the wrong thing, we're going to get what the people who do the right thing get. We're going to get the reward of paradise. And so you'll hear people who, because they are Muslim, because they were born Muslims, they believe that they're going to paradise, irrespective of how they behave. And I've had colleagues in the past who say things like, I'm a Muslim, but I don't believe in it. I'm a Muslim, but I don't believe in it. They actually think that they don't have to believe in Islam and to practice Islam, but they remain Muslims by virtue of their parents and their parents' parents, and their parents' parents' parents being Muslim. It's in my blood. It's part of my heritage. I'll always be a Muslim no matter what I believe, no matter what I practice, no matter what I say, no matter what I do. And again, this is from what? From the shaitan. He said, وَلَأُمَنِّيَنَّهُمْ, I will fill them with wishful thinking, believing that they don't have to do the deeds of paradise, but they'll still get paradise. So if I'm going to get paradise without doing anything, what's the incentive? To do the work. You guys see that? This is what the shaitan wants to achieve. And so half of his objective is to misguide us. And then the second half of his objective is to convince us, although we're misguided, we're still going to paradise. Now, from the weapons of shaitan is directing man to do misguided acts in the name of religion. And the example that we gave last week was al-bahira, because Allah alludes to it in the verse itself. When shaitan says, I will make them cut the ears of cattle. And that's because al-bahira, the way that they would mark this particular animal that they said was special, was that they would cut what? They would cut its ear in a certain way, so when people would see that, they'd say, oh, this is al-bahira. This animal is special. Al-muhim, there are other examples, modern day examples. For example, In the time of the Prophet ﷺ, before we get to the modern day example, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the pagans, they had some remnants of the religion of Ibrahim. And one of those remnants, obviously, was al-Hajj. And one big part of Hajj is a tawaf, going around the Kaaba, 7 circuits around the Kaaba. So they're practicing this, and over time, they start to what? They start to alter the tawaf and add things to the tawaf in the name of piety, which were not from it. For example, they thought to themselves, you know, this is such a holy place, the holiest place on earth. This is God's house. It's not appropriate for a person to come to God's house in clothing that they sinned in. Wa alaikum salam. How can you come to such a holy place and wear clothes that you sinned in? So if a person comes to God's house and they're wearing clothes that they sinned in, they have to change those clothes and buy clothes in which they've done no sin. They have to buy new clothes. So what if a person came and they were poor? They didn't have any money to buy clothes. That, again, once the shaitan gets the door open, he what? Yastarsil. He continues to what? Continues to take you further and further away from what is right. So this idea that you have to wear clothes that you never sinned in, there was no basis for it, but they invented it. Again, the shaitan, he makes a person do misguided acts in the name of religion. So the first misguided act was, you can't make tawaf except in clothes in which you made no sin. Again, they made that up. And the shaitan, zayyin lahu lahum. He made it beautiful and embellished it for them. This is very good. This makes sense. Yeah, you should, this holy place. You shouldn't come to a holy place and sin you in clothes you sinned in. So they said, okay, we'll have clothing and we'll sell it. It'll be something we can make money off of. So it became a commercial idea. It became a way to capitalize. And at the same time, it became a way they thought to get closer to Allah. But some people would come and they would be destitute. They would be poor. They had no means to buy clothing. So then they had to come up with a solution for that. Again, from the shaitan. Because what does the shaitan want? He wants us to do the most lewd and immoral acts in the name of what? Deen. So they said, oh, well, we have to have a solution for that. These people have come, they don't have money, and they're wearing clothes that they sinned in. They said, okay, they have to go around the Kaaba naked. And that's what they started doing. And they brought this into the deen of Allah, this misguided act in the name of what? In the name of worshiping Allah. And this is what the shaitan does, right? And we learn that from the ayat. ثُمَّ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ, or an example from today is where people, they call upon other than Allah in the name of Islam, in the name of honoring and showing respect for the awliya. That we call upon them because they are close to Allah, they are sinless or as close to sinless as possible, and we are very sinful. So instead of calling on Allah directly, because that wouldn't be appropriate given our denigrated status because of our sin, we call upon what? The awliya, and they will call upon Allah for our behalf. You guys see that? You guys see how the shaitan makes a person do something misguided in the name of what? Name of religion. But another of shaitan's weapons that we mentioned last week was directing man to change what Allah created, seeking to make it more attractive, but marring it in the process and also incurring Allah's curse in the process. And we mentioned the athar or the hadith where Ibn Mas'ud, he said, لَعَنَ اللَّهُ النَّامِسَ وَالْمُتَنَمِّسَ وَالْوَاشِمَ وَالْمُسْتَوْشِمَ إِلَى آخِرِهِ. He said, may Allah curse the woman who plucks the eyebrows of other women and the woman who plucks her own eyebrows. May Allah curse the one who makes tattoos for women and the woman who gets tattooed, and the women who make these gaps between their teeth, because in that time they considered a woman with gaps in her teeth to be attractive. Ila akhirihi. They made these alterations in their creations. Another thing that the shaitan, we talked extensively about that. That's what led to all the questions, which we're going to answer shortly. We also learned last week some of the ways that we can combat, because we said the most important thing in our process of trying to learn about how the shaitan practices his enmity against us is to learn how to counter it. Doesn't do any good to, for example, learn like if you were practicing some type of martial arts and they teach you like, okay, this is a hold that people will get you in, right? They teach you, okay, they're gonna put you in this chokehold. And they don't teach you how to get out of that, right? They're gonna teach you how the hold works and they're gonna teach you how to counter it. So we talked about how to counter some of these weapons of warfare of the shaitan. So as far as the weapon of misleading us in both knowledge and action, we said the way to counter that is by always actively seeking the truth. Actively seeking the truth. Never get to a point in your study of Islam and your practice of Islam that you say, you know what? I've arrived. There's no more I need to learn. There's no more study I need to do. Everything I do, everything I believe, everything I practice is what? Is 100% right. There are no mistakes or errors in my beliefs or practices. Never get to that point, but you're actively what? Studying the truth. There was a student of Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala who came to me and said, he said, الخلاف بين أصحاب رسول الله لو كان في مسألة قولان من الصحابة هل لنا أن نختار أيهما شئنا. He said, is it permissible for us just to, if the companions differ in any matter, and they have two opinions, some of the companions taking this view and some are taking that view, can we just take whichever one because they're Ashab Rasulullah, right? They know the deen, and if we just follow either one of them is okay. So Malik, he responds and he says, لا والله إنما هو خطأ والصواب والحق واحد لا يتعدد فتحري الصواب. He said, no, it's not permissible for you just to pick eeny, meeny, miny, mo. But rather, he said, it's either right or wrong. The companions, if they have opinions, and the opinions are black and white, they're irreconcilable. One of them has to be right and one of them has to be wrong. وَالْحَقُّ وَاحِدٌ لَا يَتَعَدَّدْ. And the truth is one, it is not numerous truths. It's not like, okay, everything is right, like some people say, like all the imams are right. Not if they all have different opinions which can't be reconciled. He said, فَتَحَرِّ الصَّوَابِ. He said, so actively look for the truth, meaning hold the two opinions up to the light of the dalil, the evidence from Quran and Sunnah, and whichever one is closest to the dalil, follow it. This is how we have to be. Which means that we might have studied something for 10, 15 years and we've been doing it that way. And then somebody comes and says, you know, I don't think that the way you're doing it is correct. I don't think that your understanding of that issue is correct. Here's what the Prophet said. Here's what Allah says. Here's what the scholars say about that, interpreting it, and you come to see it makes sense to you. You actively what? You actively go after that. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me look at this issue a little bit more deeply, with a little more depth and breadth. And if you discover that you were mistaken, then you do the next thing. The next weapon is to willfully submit to the truth upon discovering it. Once somebody shows you, yeah, I was in error all this time. I was in error. You do what? Immediately, you what? You change course in the direction of the dalil. The scholars of Islam, they often have this like little statement that they say, Naduru ma dalil haythu da. We follow the evidence wherever it leads. That means we don't make up our mind and then look for the proof to support what we believe. No, we follow the evidence wherever it leads. And Imam as-Saafiy rahimahullah ta'ala, he has a statement where he said, أجمع المسلمون على أنه من استبان له سنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لم يكن له ليدعها لقول أحد من الناس كائنا من كان. He said the Muslims are in agreement, unanimously agreed, that whoever the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah becomes apparent to him, it's not permitted for him to abandon it for the statement of anyone, no matter who that person is. What is as-Saafiy saying? He's saying, Naduru ma dalil haythu da. Once the sunnah becomes apparent to us, once the truth becomes apparent to us, we do what? We follow it. We just willfully submit to it. Number 3, from the counter weapons, is we have to always follow the path of the true believers and never allow ourselves, no matter what good deeds that we're doing, Never allow ourselves to become deluded. No matter how much good we're doing, we never think, oh, I've arrived. We never think that. Especially, this is even if we're doing a lot of good, we don't say, I've arrived. This is especially true if we know we have indiscretions. If we know we do some things which are wrong. And we mentioned the ayah from Surah Al-Mu'minun. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, describing the believers, He says, وَالَّذِينَ يُؤْتُونَ مَا آتَوْا وَقُلُوبُهُمْ وَجْلَةٌ أَنَّهُمْ إِلَىٰ رَبِّهِمْ رَاجِعُونَ. He said, and those who give what they give while their hearts are what? Filled with fear, knowing that they're going to return to their Lord. Aisha, she asked the Prophet ﷺ, are they the people who, she said, يَشْرَبُونَ الْخَمْرَ وَيَسْرِقُونَ, are they the people who drink wine and they steal? The Prophet said, no, Aisha, bint Siddiq, no, daughter of Siddiq, they are the people who yusallun, wa yasumun, wa yatasaddaqun. They're the people who they pray and they fast and they give charity, but they're afraid that Allah's not going to what? Accept it. SubhanAllah, they're good people, but they don't allow themselves to be deluded into thinking, oh, I have both feet in paradise already. They're always afraid Allah might not accept it. Maybe I wasn't sincere enough. Maybe I didn't do it correctly. This is the way that we can avoid being tricked by the shaitan, or him using this particular trick of making us believe that what? That everything is fine. I'm in paradise. I said La ilaha illallah, so everything is good. Once the shaitan gets us to fall into that trap, you'll see us descending and descending and descending in terms of what? Doing less and less and less. But the believer who understands, no matter how good I think I am, that doesn't necessarily mean that Allah thinks that I'm that good. Well, they'll continue to what? To work and strive to get better and better and better. And the last thing we mentioned as far as countering the shaitan's weapon of warfare, and that was mentioned in these two ayat, is shunning the altering of Allah's creation and shunning those who engage in it. So we ourselves, we learn what the prohibited altering is, what that looks like, what constitutes that, and we don't do it. We actively avoid it. And we also don't allow ourselves to glamorize or approve of what we're seeing around us in our day and age, where everybody and anybody who's anybody is changing what? Is changing the creation of Allah. We don't allow ourselves to what? To applaud that, to be okay with that. We're repulsed by that. We're repulsed by Khloe Kardashian, I believe that's her name, Khloe Kardashian or whatever, who, I mean, if you take a picture of her 10 years ago, when you take a picture of her today, it's like you're looking at two different people because of all the work that she had done. We don't applaud Caitlyn Jenner, and maybe it's a family thing. I think they're all related. We don't applaud him, Bruce Jenner, for making himself into a woman. We don't applaud that. We don't approve of that. We don't call that courage. We call it what? We call it following the footsteps and the handiwork of the shaitan. So after that recap, I wanted to mention, before we answer the questions that came last week, I want to give, I think it's always important, particularly in Masail like this, that we give the people a fishing pole instead of just giving them a fish. So giving a fish would be like halal, haram, just giving you a fish. But if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for what? One day. Give him a fishing pole and what? He'll eat forever. If I give you the principles, then you leave this place, and there's another issue that comes up that we didn't specifically talk about here, but it's applicable. You can apply the principle, and then you'll know halal or haram. So let's look at the principles ala ujala. So one of the principles that would, because when we focused on this part of the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَيُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ, they will alter the fair natured created by Allah, or the fair nature created by Allah. So what constitutes that? That prohibited altering of Allah's creation. Number one, altering it in a way that fundamentally changes it. Makes it something other than what Allah actually created. If you alter it in a way which fundamentally changes it, you're guilty of what? This prohibited type of what? Of altering. So in our day and age, it would be where men become women and women become men. That's a fundamental altering. Allah created you a man and you make yourself into a woman. Type number two from the guiding principles altering it in a way that is altering it in a way which is contrary to what Allah intended. So Allah intended something and you alter yourself in a way that contradicts what Allah intended. It could be as serious as self-mutilation. It could be as serious as that, self-mutilation. A person, for example, amputates what? Amputates his arm, cuts off a finger. And I'm not talking about he cuts it off because there's a medical need to do so. I'm saying he just does it. Just does it like a dare. Somebody dares you and you do it. But it could be as simple as what? As shaving your beard. Allah didn't intend for men not to have hair on their faces. That's why it's natural for us to what? Grow hair. Some of us grow a lot of hair, some of us grow a little hair, but he wants men to be distinguishable from women. And that's why most men, I'd say 99% of men naturally grow what? Some hair on their face. And they actually have to do what? They have to shave it to remove it or wax it to remove it. It's like it's something that they actively have to remove because it's what? It's supposed to be there. Allah intended for it to be there. Another principle is altering it in a way that contradicts the explicit precepts of Islam. So Allah or His Messenger specifically say, this is prohibited. And then you do what? You alter yourself, contradicting what Allah and His Messenger said, don't do it. And we gave the example from the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud in which he said, لَعَنَ اللَّهُ الْوَاصِلَ وَالْمُسْتَوْشِمَ الْوَاشِمَ وَالْمُسْتَوْشِمَ وَالنَّامِصَاتِ وَالْمُتَنَمِّصَاتِ وَالْوَاصِلَ وَالْمُسْتَوْصِلَاتِ. He said, Allah curses those women who tattoo others and who get tattooed. Allah curses those women who pluck their eyebrows and those women who pluck eyebrows and those women who request or ask that their eyebrows be plucked. And He curses those women who get these extensions. They extend their hair, they put on wigs, or they extend their hair. And He went on to say Allah curses the women who do what? Who put these gaps between their teeth, seeking to what? To beautify themselves thereby. So these are examples of specific things that is the Sharia prohibits that type of changing. If somebody goes and changes it, then they would be what? They would fall into that prohibited type of changing Allah is talking about when He says فَيُغَيِّرُونَ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. Another principle, guiding principle, is altering the creation in a way that constitutes shuhra. What do you mean by shuhra? It's when you do something and you draw unnecessary attention to yourself thereby. Or you draw the type of attention to yourself that you shouldn't want, negative attention. And the example that comes to mind, it might not be the best example, but just to give you an example so you can conceptualize it, will be, for example, of a person, he dyed his hair the colors of the rainbow. Dyed his hair the color of the rainbow. So he comes out, I'm going to ask you honestly, you saw a guy walking down the street, even a non-Muslim, walking down the street with his hair dyed the color of the rainbow, right? Red, and yellow, and blue, and green, and whatever. You would look twice, wouldn't you? And after you look twice and you pass by him, you might be like, right? You would disapprove of it. This is what we mean by shuhra. You do something that most people would not do. When you do it, you turn people's heads and you turn their heads, they look at you, and whether they voice it or they don't voice it inside themselves, they feel repulsed by what you've done. They feel like what you've done was not proper. You guys see that? That's what we mean by shuhra. An example of this, and this is important, especially for our young people, would be some piercings that people get. Not all piercings, but some piercings that people get. Another example, maybe this is a better example, if I just say general piercings, a person like, well, which piercing? Lobe gauging. You guys know what that is, right? Lobe gauging. This is where they they basically stretch the earlobe. So they pierce it with something that will stretch it. And then once it gets stretched, they put a bigger piercing to stretch it more. Okay? That is a type of like altering. No, this one, that's not a good one for the shuhra, but it is a good one for the next one. So the next principle, guiding principle, is altering the creation in a way that constitutes the prohibited resembling of the disbelievers. And the Prophet told us in hadith, he said, "Man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum." Whoever resembles a people, he's one of them. So that means it's prohibited to resemble what? The non-Muslims, because that would make you, at least theoretically, make you one of them. So obviously, this lobe gauging, this earlobe stretching is something which is common amongst what? The non-Muslims, not something that's practiced by the Muslims. So the Muslims aren't allowed to do what? To do lobe gauging. But another principle is if you alter the creation in a way which is harmful. Because the Prophet said in the hadith, "La darar wa la dirar." There should be no self-harm or doing harm to others. So if a person were to alter his creation in a way which is harmful to himself, then that would be what? Considered the prohibited, or it would constitute or fall into that category of the prohibited, changing the creation of Allah. And then last but not least from the principles is altering it without a legitimate reason. And that's the example that the Prophet gave is al-mutafallijat lil-husn. Those women who there's nothing wrong with their teeth, but they start to do what? To put gaps in between their teeth, changing the creation without a legitimate reason. In fact, their reason to them is it's beautiful. Or at least in that time, it was considered a type of cosmetic beautification. But that shows you also that in the eyes of the Sharia, that's not a legitimate reason. But last week, there were about 6 questions that came. One of them I think we did kind of answer, but we want to revisit it. And then there were actually 2 that we want to revisit, and then there were 4 that we didn't get a chance to. So the first one was toning the body through exercise. Toning the body through exercise. Now this is a good chance for us to practice what we just learned. You got the fishing pole, let's see if you can catch a fish. So the first one was toning the body through exercise. Is that considered the prohibited, or does it fall in the category of the prohibited changing of the creation of Allah? Number 2 was lengthening one's hair. If you lengthen your own hair, and there's 2 ways a person can do that, and unfortunately we only addressed one of them with the sister who asked it. I hope that she's listening somewhere so she can get the other half. So lengthening one's hair through extension, and then lengthening one's hair using hair care products. Number 3, 4, 5, and 6, these were new questions. One of them was, can men or women wear locks? Number 4, is weight loss surgery considered cosmetic surgery or altering the body if it was due to a medical or health issue, like for example, high blood pressure, diabetes, etc. Number 5, in some cases, women use yarn to extend their hair. Is this permitted? They use yarn. And number 6, is it permitted to get braces to align and straighten teeth? So let's go to number 1. Let's see if you can catch a fish. Remember the principles I gave you. Toning the body through exercise. What do you think? Is that from changing, the prohibited changing of the creation of Allah, or is it permitted? Changing the body through exercise. Yeah, it's permitted. Why? Because are you fundamentally altering it? Ahsanti. So you're not fundamentally altering it. You're not altering it in a way which Allah doesn't approve of, or making it serve a purpose it wasn't supposed to serve. And as a sister said, the Prophet said in the hadith, وَلِي بَدْنِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقٍّ. And your body has what? Has a right of you. We're supposed to take care of this body, and one way you take care of it is what? Through exercise, right? Through exercise. So that does not count, and you guys just caught a fish, mumtaz. Let's do number 2 and see if we can catch a fish. And 2 had 2 parts to it. So lengthening one's hair. The first part was lengthening using extensions. What do you say? What say you? Can we do it or not do it? Why? Based upon the principles we just gave. Why not? Okay. What did we say about the principles? We said altering in a way which contradicts this the specific precepts of Islam. So if the Prophet of Allah or his messenger said, you can't do this, then we can't do it. Even if it's not something which is harmful, even if it's not something which is fundamentally changing the creation, if it's expressly prohibited, we can't do it. And this has been expressly prohibited in the hadith, in which the Prophet said, لَعْنَ اللَّهُ الْوَاصِلَ وَالْمُسْتَوْصِلَ. Allah curses the woman who extends other women's hair by adding hair to it, right? Or the woman al-mustawsila who requests that her hair be extended. You guys see that? So extensions are prohibited. Tayyib, what about using hair care products? Somebody gets some. Thank God it's natural, right? Thank God it's all natural, whatever they have, these different hair care products. And it's like they get a bunch of ingredients from the earth, or even scientists, makes things in the lab. And they find that, Sogo. So they find that if you put it in your hair naturally does what? It grows. It opens up the follicles. It grows thicker. It grows longer. It discourages breakage. And so what? It starts to grow longer. Whereas if you have a lot of breakage and damaged hair, it continues to what? Be short, because every time it tries to grow, it breaks off. So they have these, some of them natural formulas, some of them scientifically manufactured formulas, and you put in your hair and it makes your hair grow. What do you guys think? You got the poll. What do you think?
Yes.
Yeah, that's permissible. That would be permissible, because again, it doesn't violate any of the principles, the guiding principles we just mentioned, right? All right, now let's go to the new ones. Can men or women have locks? You guys know what locks are, right?
No.
You don't know what locks are?
No.
You know what it is. You're just trying to be funny.
Locks?
Yeah, locks. You know what locks are? The brother that was just sitting here, he had some locks. Maybe that's why he got up and left. Alhamdulillah. But you don't know what locks are?
I mean, like.
No, I tell you what. No. Locks are like something you do with your hair. But I tell you what. As soon as you leave, you Google it, okay? And you'll see what I'm talking about. Locks.
I think I know what you're talking about.
All right. So, again, this is one of those ones where I'm gonna give you some principles. I'm gonna try to hurry up too, because I wanna stop, give people time to make dua before Maghrib, etc. So I'm trying to stop early. طيب على ujala, give you some principles, because again I want you to be able to fish. طيب, the first principle I'm going to give you is a fundamental principle in the deen of Allah. Al-aslu fil ashya ghayr al-ibadat al-hillu wal-ibaha. The original rule of thumb when it comes to anything in the anything in the dunya, which has nothing to do with the deen directly, is that it is permissible and allowed. That's the asl. So first it says, hey, can I wear blue jeans? What's the asl? What's the original rule? What's the original rule? It's allowed, right? Person says, can I wear a cotton shirt? What's the asl? It's allowed. Person says, can I eat a steak? What's the asl? It's allowed. Person says, can I go swimming on Thursday? What's the asl?
Yes.
It's allowed. It's all what? It's all what?
Allowed.
Dunya. It's all dunya, and it's going to be halal until you have proof that it's what? Haram. So if somebody comes and says you can't go swimming on Thursday, it's haram. The burden of proof will be on who? The person who went swimming, or the person who claimed it's haram? The person claims haram, because the asl, the original rule when it comes to anything dunyawi outside of the deen, or not directly related to the deen, is that what? It's permitted. That's the first principle. That's very important. So if somebody said, what's the asl? What's the original rule when it comes to dreadlocks? You have to say what? Halal. You start from where? You start from halal, which means now we gotta, if we say it's haram, we gotta prove it's haram. The burden of proof is on us, because it's from the dunya or the deen. All right. طيب. Now the second principle I want you to pay attention to is that this, what we just said, it includes fashion, it includes cosmetic beautification, it includes hairstyles. Hairstyles, all of them are what? Halal. Until proven haram. Cosmetic beautification. Person wants to beautify themselves. All bets are on, unless we have proof to the contrary. Right? Person says, hey, can I part my hair? Can I part my hair here and like bring it over here, and can I part it down the middle? The asl is what? Al-hil. Cosmetic beautification. Right? fashion. Person says, can I wear, I don't know, can I wear a shirt with flared sleeves? Right? What did we say? Al-asl what? Al-hil. Okay, good. طيب. Number 3. There's some specific exceptions to the general rule of permissibility, and they include. So we say all bets are on. But if anything that you're doing, cosmetically, hairstyle, fashion, if it violates any of these 3 principles I'm going to mention, then what? All bets are off. Like number 1, there are some prohibited, some expressly prohibited fashions, like silk for men. You guys see that? So once we have an express prohibition from the Prophet ﷺ or from Allah, automatically that thing becomes haram, even though the asl, the original rule, is what? Al-hil, permissibility. Silk for men, mini skirts for women. That's prohibited. Woman can't say, well, al-asl, come out with a scarf on and a mini skirt. And say, yes, say what? What? Al-asl. Al-asl, yeah, the asl is that, but we have specific prohibitions from the Prophet that a woman can't wear what? A mini skirt. Hairstyles, there's some expressly prohibited hairstyles. There's some hairstyles that the Prophet specifically said a man can't have, like al-qaza. You know what al-qaza is? Al-qaza. Al-qaza is where no, it's not what you have. Al-qaza is where you leave a part and do what? And shave a part. See, what you have is what? It's tapering. You still have hair. It's just some of the hair is longer than the other part. That's not qaza. Some people will say qaza, that's wrong. Qaza is like a bowl cut. You guys know what a bowl cut is? Yeah. They put a bowl on your head and they shave everything else. Right? That's an example of al-qaza. It's not the only way you can do qaza, but it's an example. That's what we call al-qaza. Is a mohawk a qaza?
No.
Yeah, you shave a part and you leave what? You leave a part. The second exception is fashions and hairstyles which are intended to garner unnecessary or undesirable attention. We talked about this previously, ash-shuhra. Person gets a hairstyle that is novel. It's odd in the place where they live. It's like something, nobody wears that. Nobody does that. And so when you do it, you're turning heads. That shuhra makes that hairstyle prohibited. But one last exception to the rule is fashions and hairstyles which are exclusively worn by the disbelievers. If it's something exclusive to them, meaning if you wear it, people automatically think that you're one of them. Like, for example, some Jews, they wear these what? You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. It's like there's I think this is the Hasidic ones. They wear these locks where they're curled locks that come down. It's like long sideburns that come down and they're curled. A Muslim can't do that. Because if he does that, people will think he's one of these Hasidic Jews. And the Prophet said in the Hadith, whoever resembles a people, he's one of them. Tayyib Tanbih, one notice before we give the ruling, that the Prophet ﷺ, he prohibited his followers in general, and specifically he prohibited men from having unsightly, uncomely hair, which is not pleasant to look at. So for example, we have the hadith collected by Abu Dawood and Abu Hurairah, in which the Prophet said, "Man kan lahu sha'run falyukrimhu." Whoever has hair, then let him honor his hair. We also have the hadith collected by Abu Dawood, Ahmed, and Nasa'i, and authenticated by Al-Albani, rahimahullah ta'ala, on authority of Jabir, in which the Prophet said, "Amma yajdu hada ma yusakkin bihi sha'ra." So he said about a man who came in, his hair was like all over the place, totally disheveled. He said to the people in his company or his proximity, he said, "Doesn't this person find something by which he can do what? Make his hair look nice. He said, yusakkin, settle his hair down, right? Make it lie down instead of being all over the place." There's a version of this hadith in Muwatta on the authority of, I want to say it's Ata ibn Yasar, in which the Prophet ﷺ, he said, أَلَيْسَ هَذَا خَيْرًا مِنْ أَنْ يَأْتِيَ أَحَدُكُمْ ثَائِرَ الرَّأْسِ كَأَنَّهُ شَيْطَانٌ. He said, is this not better than one who came with disheveled hair looking like a devil? He actually attributed to what the devil. But that hadith, the last one, is mursal, which means there's a disconnection in the chain. طيب. So there's an important principle that the Prophet is giving us about hair. And that is that the hair, a person should honor his hair. And the scholars of Islam said they honor it by what? Washing it, oiling it, by combing it, and by not leaving it in a way which is what? Considered disheveled. طيب. Dreadlocks, according to some, are an abnormal, ugly style of braiding. And therefore, they say, some, that this style of braiding, it violates the statement of the Prophet where he said, فَلْيُكْرِمْ شَعْرَهُ, let him honor his hair. And the prohibition to what? To leave your hair, or to be tha'ir ras, like leave your hair all over the place. Some of them say that, right? But brothers and sisters, I'm going to ask you honestly. The word abnormal and the word ugly, is it relative? Is it relative?
Yes.
Somebody use an even better word. Is it subjective? Is it subjective? Ahsantum. And basically, a lot of its influence is informed by what? By culture. So what one culture considers to be abnormal and ugly, another culture says what? It's perfectly normal and perfectly what? Attractive. You guys see that? So can that be a basis for me to say, oh, you know what? That hair, it looks abnormal. That hair looks ugly. Can that be a basis for an Islamic ruling? Can it be a basis for Islamic ruling? If I say it's ugly, if I say it's abnormal, I'm going to ask you honestly, people with braids, don't they take care of their hair sometimes better than people who don't have braids?
Yes.
Isn't that true? Their hair, a lot of times, it smells better. It's better. It's more kempt, right? They're more concerned with it. They wash it regularly. All those things that the Prophet considered, or the scholars considered, from ikram ash-sha'r, from honoring the hair. So now, after everything you heard, do you have, okay, if the original rule is permission, do you have anything to prohibit? No. Do you have anything to prohibit?
No.
You have nothing to prohibit. So therefore, it'll be what? It will be permitted, provided that two things are not taking place. The first thing that can't take place is a person adopts his hairstyle to imitate the non-Muslims. And he can't adopt this hairstyle in a place where this hairstyle is unheard of. He can't adopt this hairstyle in a place where this hairstyle is unheard of, because it'll be what? It'll be shuhra. You guys remember we talked about that? These are two specific things the Prophet prohibited: shuhra and imitating the kuffar. So if a person adopts that hairstyle because he wants to look like the Rastafarians, you guys see that? I want to look like Bob Marley. Everybody says I look like him in the face, I got to get the hair. If he does it with that intention, would that be permissible? وَمَنْ تَشَبَّهَ بِقَوْمٍ فَهُوَ مِنْهُمْ. Whoever imitates the people is from them. If he lived in a place where that hairstyle is totally unheard of, and he adopted it, and every time he walked down the street, people are like, would that be acceptable? Wouldn't be acceptable because of what? A shuhra. But if that's not the case, if those two things are not the case, the asl, the original rule would be that these locks are what? Are permitted. You guys see that? They're permitted. طيب. The next ones are easy. We'll get through those relatively quickly. طيب, weight loss surgery. I'm going to read to you really quickly, bear with me. I'm going to read to you what the Mayo Clinic's website says about what they call, technically, bariatric surgery. That's what they call it, when they make your stomach smaller, right? And that helps you to lose weight. So the Mayo Clinic, they say, bariatric surgery is done to help individuals lose excess weight. And remember, listen to what I'm saying, because I want to see if you can catch a fish. Bariatric surgery is done to help individuals lose excess weight and reduce their risk of potentially life-threatening weight-related health problems, including heart disease and stroke, high blood pressure, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFLD, sleep apnea, type 2 diabetes. So what are the reasons why they usually give this surgery? Because somebody, because of their weight, is suffering from one of these things, some of which can kill you. Right? So we give you this surgery because it will help you what? Help rid you of these ailments or illnesses. Goes on to say, bariatric surgery is typically done only after an individual has tried to lose weight by improving his or her diet and exercise habits. We only give it to people who can't lose the weight otherwise. So in that case, what do you guys think? Is it from the prohibited change of the creation of Allah? It's not, because the person has a justification for it. It's not purely beautification. And their justification is for medical reasons and to ward off the harm of disease and illness. And if you look at the Sharia teaches us two things. It was two principles. One, the principle of a tadawi. The principle of what? If you're sick, you're supposed to be sick. If you're sick, you're supposed to treat your illnesses. Do whatever you have to do to get better, as long as the specific thing you're doing is not prohibited. As the Prophet said in the hadith, he said, Ya ayyuhan nas tadawu. فَمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ مِنْ دَاءٍ إِلَّا أَنزَلَ لَهُ دَوَاءٍ. He said, O people, seek the cures for your ailments, because Allah has not created a disease except He created its cure. He wants us to actively seek the cure for our ailments. Doctor says, hey, you got a thyroid problem, man. You're not going to be able to beat this weight unless we do this surgery for you. You guys see that? Then I'm supposed to seek the cure for that. But also we have the qa'idah of al-darura. Al-darurat tubih al-mahdurat. When there's an extreme need, if something is prohibited, if there's an extreme necessity, that prohibited thing becomes permitted. But the fifth question was using yarn for extensions. So a woman has short hair, she takes yarn and she kind of like, strings it into her hair somehow and lengthens her hair. Is that permitted? Some of the scholars, they say that if what the woman uses to extend her hair is clearly not hair, it's a material which anybody who sees it will clearly see it's not hair. It's clearly yarn or string or whatever. They say that that's permitted because what's prohibited is extending the hair with hair, not with something which is clearly not hair, and avoids deception. So they permit it, and Allah knows best. I think that they're right. I think that they're right, and Allah knows best. But the last one was braces, realigning the teeth or correcting your smile using braces. Generally, when people get braces, they do it to correct defects, crooked teeth, overbite, underbite, other issues. Overall, they're trying to achieve dental health. Catch a fish. What do you think? Are they doing something prohibited? So a person is born with a defect that causes their teeth to go straight. Their front teeth go straight instead of going straight down. So it basically pierces this lip, causes them pain. Do they have to just live with that?
No.
Or can they correct it?
They can correct it.
They can correct it. We can say it's min bab tadawi, as we said previously, treating medical ailments. Also, we said earlier, Allah doesn't want us to change our creation from what He fundamentally intended to serve, the purpose He fundamentally intended to serve. So what if we're born with a defect that causes us to what? The purpose for which that part was intended to serve, it doesn't serve that purpose because of the defect. We're allowed to correct it so that the body part comes in line with what Allah intended. Like, any questions? I'm going to stop there. We have about maybe 10 minutes before the adhan. Any questions, comments? Tafadhal, Hussam.
Can you have a
I'm coming.
Can you have a mohawk with this jaw like more hair over here?
No mohawk, Hussam, because mohawk means you're going to cut a part and leave a part. Tafadhali.
Nails. What about nails?
Nails, like growing your nails long, or are you talking about they put the big plastic ones like a tiger in? But obviously, Islam, it orders us and considers from the fitrah, from the nature of mankind, taqleem al-adafir, trimming the nails. And that applies across genders, for males and females. So a woman growing long nails, although in this culture it's considered feminine, whenever the culture of Islam and the culture in which we live clash, the culture of Islam is supposed to supersede. Like ثم بعد ذلك, add to that it could be argued that lengthening nails is the prohibited imitation of the kuffar, because it's not something the Muslims do. It's something the non-Muslims do, and because we live amongst them, and because it's become fashionable, that's what makes us inclined toward it. But if you would go to, for example, countries where Muslims live, and they're the dominant culture. So, for example, you would go to Egypt, or you go to Saudi Arabia, or you go to Indonesia, and you weren't in the company of people who are just gone off the West and trying to imitate them, you would find that they're all cutting their nails short. So for these two reasons, we say, yeah, women should not grow long nails. Because one, the Prophet said, is from the nature of mankind to what? To clip the fingernails. So it's from the nature of the mankind. So we're conscious of that nature if we grow them long. And then two, most likely the impetus, the motive for doing it is imitating the kuffar. And the Prophet said, But any other questions, comments, critiques? تفضل شيخ.
So
Nadeem, right? Nadeem.
Yeah.
I was close, akhi. I'm bad with names and I'm working on it. Nadeem, تفضل شيخ.
So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi
Allah
wa
sallallahu
sallam, he used to have long hair. Right?
Hey,
Like we live in a place, let's say, where long hair is looked down upon as
Hey.
unusual or abnormal.
hey.
Who wins in this situation?
طيب, again, the scholars of Islam generally on this particular question, they say that the prohibition of shuhra, it trumps everything. So even though it was the Prophet's sunnah to wear his hair long, sometimes close to what? His shoulders. This was a sunnah that he practiced because it was common amongst his people. And it was not something that he did liyusanna sunnatan. He wasn't doing it so that other people would follow his example. Like for example, when the Prophet ﷺ, he used to like to wear white, right? He wanted his followers to follow the example. He wanted them to prefer white clothing. The Prophet ﷺ used to love al-miswak, to brush his teeth constantly, always brushing his teeth. He wanted his followers to follow suit in that. He wanted them to consider that, adopt that as a sunnah. But when it came to, for example, some other things, like wearing an izar and a rida, he would wear, for example, he would take a wrapper and wrap it around his waist, and then take another piece of cloth and just cast it over himself. And this was his uniform, the common dress that he wore. He didn't want the people to do that, like take this as the Muslim uniform or the sunnah dress and follow my example regardless of time and space. That wasn't what he intended, but rather he wore that because it was the clothing of his people. That was what they commonly wore. Same thing with what? With the hair. So in that case, since the Prophet did not intend to make it a sunnah, and he expressly said that we're supposed to avoid a shuhra. The scholars say that shuhra always trumps, which means, in your case, if you were in a place where wearing the hair long became common, it would be okay for you to adopt this sunnah because there would be no shuhra. But if you're in a place like you said, where when people wear their hair long, people yastankiruna, they basically look at it as something odd, something abnormal, something out of place. Then the Prophet wants us then to what? To not adopt that hairstyle because of what it constitutes of a shuhra. And yu'akkid dhalik, and this is further confirmed or supported by the fact there's a qaida in usul fiqh that says al-hadir muqaddam al-mubih. That if you have two apparently contradictory pieces of guidance from the Messenger of Allah, for example, one of them prohibiting and one of them permitting, the one that prohibits always takes precedence over the one that permits. So the Prophet grew his hair long, that's an indication of permission, right? But he specifically said avoid a shuhra. That's an indication of what? Prohibition. That always supersedes because the Prophet said, إِذَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ وَنَهِيتُكُمْ عَنْ شَيْءٍ فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ. He said, if I command you to do something, do it as much as you can. But if I prohibit you, then don't come anywhere near it. So what that tells you is that the Prophet gives precedence to what he prohibits over what he permits. And we have to do the same thing in practice. When he does something that tells us, hey, this is okay to do, and he tells us, don't do that. Then we give precedence to what he said not to do. Like any other questions? Sam already gave you one. I got to give somebody else a chance.
Someone that lives through like a place that like
You're the boss,
like
bro.
girls usually have long hair or short hair. What if one is had long hair and all of them had short hair? Is it okay to still have long hair because they're wearing a hijab?
Yes. And you just caught a fish, brother. Thank you. Alhamdulillah. Anybody else? Go ahead, Anwar. Looks like there's not going to be any time for it. But this is fine. No, you go.
When you were talking about toning as far as exercising, you were specifically using the word tone as in like, when you say tone, you're thinking moderation, like to kind of briefly shape up. You're not talking about somebody trying to, like somebody that's bodybuilders, people bulk up and putting on like, 300 pounds of mass, like looking huge, or in the case where women tone up so much where she now looks like a
man.
Right.
Looks like a man.
So you're using the word, when you use the word tone, you were specifically using that word tone to mean that as opposed to just exercise in general, because you can go to the other extreme.
Yeah, I think definitely when you gave the example of women who become so muscular that they resemble men, that definitely
or even if you
it's clear.
Let's say even if it's like a dude. Let's
now the men
where it's like you're so
massive
and you're only doing it just you can't maintain it. You have to physically work out hours and hours a day and change everything in your life to maintain that kind of bulk.
Wallahi, I thought about this actually and was hoping that nobody would ask me because but yeah, I thought about the whole like these bodybuilders, like you said, who get to the point where they're extremely massive, and wallahi, I'm reticent. I think it's clear with the females, but I do incline toward what you said, that it seems like, when they get to that point of excess, that they are changing the creation of Allah in a way which is harmful, and therefore
normal too.
Exactly, abnormal, contradicts what Allah intended. It seems, but I don't have any precedent. That's why. So I have to look for precedent for that before I say definitively, but I do incline toward what you said. Yeah, it just feels like it's at least toting the line, if not anything else. So there's a question from the sisters. We'll try to answer. Rujala, is there a hadith on combing hair at least every 3 days? I don't think there's a hadith like that. I don't think so. But let me look to just double check. But I don't believe there's a hadith that says you have to every 3 days. But basically, there's general hadith that talk about keeping the hair comely, I guess, comely, if that makes sense. Like any other questions, comments, critiques as let's close. I thank you all for coming. Jazakallah khair on making sacrifice. Father Sheikh, you want to ask something real quick?
I have like 4 questions.
4? Okay, I tell you what, can you submit them to me and then we'll answer them next week? Because we want to stop for prayer, people are going to break fast, etc. Again, thank you all for coming. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.